to the Game Deflators Podcast. My name is James.
I'm John.
Alrighty, what is today's topic?
I guess we could start off with our crappy game challenge we just did.
Oh yeah, I'm still waiting for you to post your review to the Deflators Facebook page.
Yeah,
I haven't got to read it yet.
Yeah, I had a little bit of an issue with Facebook and a little banning on there. So I can read out my review too if you really want, and then I can obviously pop it onto our Facebook.
No, you should put it on the Facebook page, but just give us a general rundown. You do yours, I'll do mine.
General rundown is Castlevania 64 was my challenge James provided. I would consider the name change of Skeleton Whip Simulator 64 to be a little more appropriate in the 30 minutes that I played for that challenge. Essentially, my issues with it were terrible camera angles. First boss was a giant skeleton, and I found myself frequently being stuck behind a camera, which completely blocked out the entire view of the game. And that was pretty much frequent throughout the entire gameplay, throughout several areas of the game. And I would say the inability of the game to provide checkpoints, and how it would, the second you died at any point, usually off of falling off a ledge due to poor controls, you'd have to restart the entire process over again. So that was pretty painful in itself. Constant restarting with the bad camera angles and the just lack of enemies was just absolutely horrible. So that was my experience.
Alrighty, my game was City Connection. Yes, never bothered to play it before, other than when I bought it initially, tested, immediately turned it off because it looked boring, and I was right. It is, to me, it's just terribly boring. It's a side-scrolling game, kind of like Joust or any of those other games. Either go to your left or to your right, and the stage just seems to repeat in a loop. According to the manual, there's other stages you can get to. How you do that is just completely beyond me, because what you do is there's 3 platforms that you can jump onto, and of course, once you hit the ground, you can't get back up for anything, but you have to collect oil drums to be able to shoot those as projectiles to shoot police cars and knock them out of the way. The real problem comes in that there's this stupid cat holding a checkered flag that pops in from the side of the screen that you're almost guaranteed to run into, and it's pretty difficult to jump over him because you really don't have time to respond. Every time you hit him, boom, game, life gone, 2 lives, game over. Run out of oil drums and run into the cops twice, life over. And I played for approximately 19 minutes is how long I could put up with it, because after about the 19-minute mark is when I found that if you're on the ground level, which is just the road, and manage to avoid the cats, and they just keep coming and bump the police cars, etc., it will actually shoot up a roadblock right under your car and take you out. So at that point, I was just like, you know what, screw this. This is boring. Maybe it's somebody's cup of tea, but it's not mine. I'm not knocking games like Joust, which I've always heard is real fun. I don't think I've ever played it, but this was just terrible, terrible, terrible game. The next game I elected John to play as my little bit of revenge is Captain Skyhawk on the NES, and I think he's going to rather enjoy that one.
And my game for you is going to be Techno Cop on the Sega Genesis. I'm sure you probably picked that up at one point in time, threw it on the shelf, and thought it would never see the light of day. So enjoy that one.
That's pretty accurate. I've actually seen gameplay videos of it. I don't remember what YouTube channel, but it looked kind of interesting. I know it's like a hybrid between a side-scrolling action shooter and a driving shooter game, kind of like Road Blasters, except from a first-person view, I think. So it ought to be interesting, but I fully expect it to be god-awful. It looks like one of those old-school 1980s PC games that got crammed onto the Sega Genesis because that was a pretty popular thing for them to do at the time.
Yeah, I haven't looked too much into Captain Skyhawk. I mean, it's obviously the NES is a little bit before my time in terms of my first console and what I was playing. I mean, I started with the Super Nintendo, so Skyhawk isn't one that's exactly been on my list to play ever. I've seen a couple of videos in the past. Didn't look so hot, and I'm anticipating this is going to be hot garbage. So we'll see. I mean, if it could be sold in a resale shop for under $5, it's going to be bad. So let's see. I'll probably get to playing that tomorrow.
I think the $5 or less tag is definitely fair. It has nice graphics. So It has nice graphics, and interesting kind of perspective where you can fly low or high. And I think that's about the only positive things I can think to say about it.
Well, so listeners wouldn't have seen this, but I think the sad emoji that I placed over the top of the sticker and sent to you the other day is probably fairly accurate. So we'll see how that goes. Well, on the topic of obviously we just finished our crappy game challenge. Current games that we're playing right now. So two of us are obviously playing Dark Souls 3. It's your second go around in the game. My first go around since I was waiting for the Fire Fades edition to go down in price. What else are you playing overall?
I'm also playing. I'm getting really bad about picking up games and only playing them here and there. I'm still working on Super Mario Odyssey. I'm also like the number one person that like everyone's finished a game and a year later I'm still working through it. So Super Mario Odyssey, still enjoying that one. I'm kind of whenever I feel like it replaying through Final Fantasy VI on the Game Boy Advanced. It's my favorite Final Fantasy of all time. Probably my favorite second favorite Super Nintendo game. All right, maybe third. We'll put it in the top five because that's definitely Super Mario World, A Link to the Past, Super Metroid, and then Final Fantasy VI. So within the top five, but definitely my favorite Final Fantasy by far. Also, kind of playing and getting tired of the Minish Cap, Legend of Zelda, the Minish Cap on Game Boy Advance. It starts out pretty fun, like a nice blend of A Link to the Past and Link's Awakening, but a lot of times I just feel dumb. Like every time, like, all right, you need to go here, and it actually shows you like the general area on the map, but it's a pain in the ass that I have to just like keep wandering around trying to find this certain spot I need to get to initiate that. Like I think I told you about it. Like the very first time you get shrunk down to Minish size, which is like completely minuscule, like the size of an, and you come across this dead end alley, and I'm like, well, how the hell am I supposed to progress? And there's just well, a normal sized acorn, but for you, it's gigantic, takes up almost the entire screen. And I had to actually look it up. I was like, oh, you're supposed to pick up the acorn and throw it out of the woods. Like, how the hell would I even imagine that I could pick up an acorn when I'm the size of it? Little things like that. It's rather dumb. It's one of the outsourced games from Nintendo where Capcom actually made it. Just like believe was it the new Metroid or something else is going to be done by another third party company. I can't remember. I saw it the other day, but that's pretty much it for me. And of course, we both. Well, I generally quit playing Neo, playing that with me as well.
Yeah, Neo I've pretty much cut out for the time being. I mean, now that Dark Souls is being played and I'm back into the Souls games and whatnot, I'm not gonna have any time for a Neo at this time. I'll probably pick it up at some point down the road, but the only issue is that given how absurdly annoying that game is and just the terrible boss battles and the lack of consistency and trying to find patterns within bosses, I'm just scared I'm going to pick that game up 3 months from now. Nobody's playing it, so I'm not going to have any sort of help. So we'll see how that goes. But as far as what I'm playing right now, I've got Kodelka set aside. Played probably about an hour of that so far. I was looking to play another RPG after having beaten Legend of Dragoon finally. Kodelka overall, so far my impressions is it's slow, very slow. I mean, it seems like I'm just constantly walking and nothing else. I find it interesting that there's no save points in the game outside of specific rooms that you go to. So what you'll end up doing is you might battle in a certain area and you'll find yourself in a room and a little S will pop up in the corner. And that's basically letting the game know that we're saving. We're going to have it stuck right here. So next time you pick up, this is a room you're in. If I go into another room and say defeat a few enemies and that S doesn't pop up and I decide to turn off my controller or turn off my system, that's it. It doesn't save that part. There's no auto saving of any nature. There's no save points. It's just literally specific checkpoints within the game, and it auto saves for you in those rooms, and that is your save. And there's no load up game, none of that. It's just continue, and it continues from that point in time. So very interesting in that respect.
Did
Other game, go on.
no, go ahead.
Other game right now I'm playing is Odyssey. So fiance and I just finally beat it. As far as the main storyline, we're trying to get all the moons at this point. Half the moons in that game are just stupid. I mean, some of them are just you walk up to Toad and play a certain song out of your settings menu, and he gives you a moon. So extremely repetitive at this point, but I understand that if you collect all the moons, there is a level that unlocks. So obviously I want to collect all the moons like an idiot. So that's the next step, is to do that. And I think we're sitting at about 565 moons or so right now.
What is
Um,
there, like 999 or something?
no, I think it's like 860 something. It's give or take 900. I don't think it's above 900, but I'm pretty sure it's like just below.
Jeez. I was
Yeah, so
actually giving real thought to like not bothering to get all the moons, but now you just said it unlocks another level or another world. It's like, um,
yeah, and as you progress through the game, there's certain points that'll say, oh, you've unlocked new outfit for Mario, or like to get to the darker side of a moon, you have to reach X amount of moons. So there's a whole bunch of stuff with that game. I mean, it's fun. I mean, I'm enjoying it, but it's starting to get a little repetitive now that I've done, 560 moons and realizing I still have almost double of that to go. Um, but it is what it is. I mean, we're having fun with it, and I mean, for a game that was $60, I'm going to try to get as much enjoyment out of it as possible, and not just set it aside. So it's kind of the key thing of that. And I guess the last game I'm playing is during my travels. So whenever I'm out of town or anything for work, or taking a road trip, I'll typically take my 3DS and I'll play Bravely Default. So I think I'm probably about 25, 30 hours in on that one, and at this point, it's more of a level grind issue. So I'm having to consistently level grind at this point, mainly because I'm just stuck on a boss. So it seems like every time I pick up the game on travel, it's just battling. At this point, there's no story. So kind of bored right now at this point with it.
we're gonna come back to that in a second. The whole stretching out games of repetitious action. What I was gonna say when you were talking about Kodelka, I was gonna ask you if you had ever played the original Resident Evil on the PlayStation, like not one of the remakes or the remasters, but like the old school, like original, either like Resident Evil One or Resident Evil Director's Cut or Resident Evil DualShock Edition.
So I played a little bit, but it was way too long ago for me to honestly speak on it and say, yeah, I remember the gameplay, I remember character names and all that stuff. I honestly don't play a whole lot of Resident Evil games. I'll pick them up every now and then, but the one on PS1, I honestly want to say the last time that I even touched that game, I was probably 10. So you're looking at almost 20 years ago.
Okay, makes sense. The reason I bring it up is you were talking about the way Koldoka saves, and it just distinctly reminded me, like, first of all, like for the younger viewers, memory cards back then, I'm sure many of them have played N64, PS2, whatever, that used memory cards to save games. That was the first time where it's like, wait, what? We have to go buy additional hardware to be able to save our game. But Resident Evil did it in a very, I wouldn't say very, but kind of an insidious sort of way that one, you had to find a room in the mansion with a typewriter, and there was multiples of them spread out, kind of like in Kodelka, certain rooms let you save. But to be able to save, you had to have an item called the ink ribbon for the typewriter, and those were a limited quantity. So in addition to trying to manage your ammo and the very, very limited healing items, you also had a limited supply of opportunities to save your game and hope you didn't screw yourself by saving at the wrong time. Every time you wanted to save to another slot, well, you got to use another ink rib. So it just reminded me distinctly of that, and I don't know if that was a design choice to increase the difficulty, or perhaps while they were trying to figure out how to make this work at the time, because there are older PlayStation games that either just don't have a save option period, much like many of the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis games. But there are others that, like Final Fantasy VII is example, like, all right, you have to actually stand on a save point, but they're pretty much everywhere. Or if you're on the overworld map, you can save, I believe you could. But Final Fantasy VII came out, I think, a few years after the original Resident Evil and things like that. I did forget to mention I'm also playing Stella Deus on the PlayStation 2. And it's not bad. The story is kind of interesting. The voice acting is just terrible, terrible, to the point of almost being hilarious, but really bad voice acting. I would describe it as anyone who wants to play Final Fantasy Tactics style games or Disgaea, but they really don't want the learning curve or the real challenge of it. Stella Deus is for them. It's very streamlined. It's more simplified. It's much easier to gain levels. There's actually an area in each town called the Catacombs that you can go in that has up to 50 floors. That you can just go in and actually grind out levels. Whereas the original Final Fantasy Tactics, you didn't really have that option. You'd have to go into a battle and either try to keep the enemy alive or attack your own teammates and things like that to get XP, because you get XP from taking action. So It's all right. I might finish it. I might not. Well, we'll figure it out as it comes up. But that's something else. That's actually when you were talking about Mario Odyssey I felt that was a very good point. And one of my, and even Neo as well, one of my complaints with a lot of games nowadays is years ago, everyone started complaining that, hey, this game is too short. I paid $60, $70 for it and it's only, 20 hours of content. And now it seems like almost every game is just filled up with repetitious fluff or grinding and things like that. What do you think about that? Do you have any examples?
Well, I mean, the striking example is obviously Neo. Given that all the enemies are just kind of rehashed in every single level. So, in what we had played, I think we put in a good 12, 15 hours in that game, and it was
If
just the same enemies over and over again.
Yeah, if not more, because I grinded out many of those the titles like you get for like kill 100 then 200 humans with the axe and things like that to get the bonuses. So I'm going to say I put in at least 20 25 hours, and even every area it's like, all right, exact same enemies, but now they're even more powerful even though you just grinded out a bunch of levels previously,
Yeah, and I mean, your mention there of the tasks essentially of killing, X amount of humans. I mean, when you really think about that, they have like certain enemies. They say, well, you have to kill, 100 of these, right? To get to that point, if you're going to progress in a game, that means from a developer standpoint that you purposefully put in the same creatures over and over again. And so I don't know if it was laziness or what, but that just kind of speaks to that repetition right there, and it just doesn't make it fun. Unlike the Soul series, obviously, where you get into a level and yeah, you've got different hollows, but it's always just so diverse. As far as other games that are just repetitious, I mean, if you look at a lot of the Mario games over history, they are pretty damn repetitive overall. I mean, you've got kind of the just basic idea, at least with Sunshine, for example. You're constantly collecting stars basically and collecting red coins in every level, and you've got the same basic style of mission that has to be done. And I mean, the team, obviously Nintendo, that developed all these games, that I don't know, it just seems that that's what they've had in mind since I guess the N64 era, is just our players want a quality game, but we're just going to fill it with a bunch of repetitious bullcrap that we think they're going to love, and it really gets tiring after a while. But
It
yeah, honestly,
truly, yeah, go ahead.
no, go on, go on.
I was going to say, I think you're pretty well correct. I mean, the Mario series is a good example that even ranging from, like, I'm just going to skip Mario Brothers 2, whatever, it's not real Mario Brothers, from 1 to 3 to World and so on. They had limited assets, but they used them well enough to make each world, like especially Mario Brothers 3 and Super Mario World, are great examples. Each world was very unique, had its own theme. And even though, hey, it's the same Goombas and the same Koopas and the paratroopers and whatnot, that they're changing everything up enough to keep it interesting. Like I remember playing through the original Mario Brothers as a child, and every time I get to like, oh, World 2 is like, oh wow, this is so different. And World 3, and even if it's they were doing a palette swap and kind of moving things around, but they would gradually introduce new enemies and new challenges and things like that. And I think that's something that most of the Mario series does well, and also I think Dark Souls does well. That everyone's like, "Oh, you just run around doing this repeatedly." It's like, well, it kind of scales up as you go. Like for instance, at the bottom of the high wall before the first real boss fight, you notice we went from fighting really dumb hollows to bigger, smarter hollows with better weapons to all of a sudden we're fighting these knights that are pretty damn good at kicking our ass, and it introduced them a bit at a time. Like here's just one. Okay, now we're going to introduce two of them and three and then a mob of them. And okay, once you get to the next area, it's completely different enemies.
Yeah, exactly. And then obviously, you have to, there's learning curves and stuff associated with it. And as you, learn of new enemies, you learn of their new attacks. And obviously, it just continues. The overall, it's not to say it's repetitive, but, there is a little repetition that you are going to get new enemies. And then the actual difficulty increases in a repetitive nature to that of other levels. So, getting past, I guess, some of what we're playing, is there anything that you are finding interest in playing? Anything that's kind of hit your radar that you're kind of keeping your eye on and say, I think I might play that one next?
Oh, I actually that's why my current gaming collection is in the shape that's in, because of the constant bombardment of that. Because at the same time, there's always just they're cranking out games so fast compared to the way things used to be, where, every year or a couple of years, maybe around Christmas, like, when I was a kid, like, all right, Final Fantasy 3, on Super Nintendo came out this year. And then next Christmas, or maybe the two Christmases after that, was like, oh, now Chrono Triggers. It was a huge gap in between. But to directly answer your question, I waited for it to get a little cheaper. I bought Sensua's Sacrifice. I'm sorry, title's Hellblade Sensua's Sacrifice, because I very much wanted to play that. I'm actually looking over at my PlayStation 4 shelf, which also has Wii U, my GameCube, and my way too many PS3 games. But as far as what I think I want to play next, it's a good question. Um, there's always something on my mind, like, I keep thinking I want to replay through Super Mario Sunshine, but not really 100% sure I want to do that. Uh, it's really hard to say. I kind of just tend to just go over to the shelf and grab whatever. Sometimes I think to myself, well, you know what? I never play my Xbox 360. I should just pick up one of those games and play. Or uh, I might just go over to the N64 shelf and decide I'm going to replay through Paper Mario again after all these years, and so on. What about you?
Um, well, I too am looking at my PS4 games on my shelf. With Ni no Kuni coming out in March, and I mean, I've got that one pre-ordered. Obviously, it's one I've wanted to play for a while now, ever since I beat the first one. And I mean, I was very late in beating the first one. I beat that one probably about 3 years after it came out, or 2 years, whatever it may be. So, very late. I think I just beat it late last year, actually. So, I mean, Ni no Kuni 2 is on my mind. Ukulele. I mean, I'm one for play. Yeah, I know your thought on that. I'm one for playing games that I know I can breeze out in 15 hours of gameplay, and Ukulele is one of those games. Given that I'm playing Dark Souls right now, I know I'm going to put in 60 hours. I just put in 60 hours or so, or 55 or whatever, somewhere around that area for Legend of Dragoon. Mario Odyssey, I've put in probably 45 hours. So I'm kind of wanting a game right now that, like an Uncharted, a Ukulele, something that from a time perspective it's going to make me feel good that I beat the game and enjoyed it. And I wasn't sitting there, you know, task and mission after mission and just everything, for 45, 50 hours. So
Good
that's kind
point
of what I
there.
want to play right now. So yeah, I mean, and that's how I am with a lot of my games. Like I will actually pretty consistently, look up how long games are going to take to beat just based on average times and playthroughs. And that's sometimes that's actually one of the reasons I came up with Kodelka as one of the games I wanted to play. Was it's an RPG that essentially is about 15 hours of gameplay on the highest end. So for me, it was, hey, you know what? Let me knock out an RPG. It's 15 hours. It'll knock it off of my, I'm going to check the box that I played it, and that's it. So that's kind of my thought process on a lot of that is, what looks cool on my shelf? What have I not even touched? How long is it going to take for me to beat it? Is it some type of gameplay I'm interested in playing right now? As you know, I'm very much into, action adventure games and RPGs. So when it's something a little bit out of that I can beat pretty quickly, I'll typically take it up.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's pretty much what I'm looking forward to. Um, well, outside of games necessarily that we're playing and want to play, wonder if you've seen any stupid listings for games that are on for sale, or any weird postings on Facebook that strike up conversations that you're just like, that's just a dumb point of view. Anything that you've seen? I've got quite a few recently.
I myself, I typically don't look anymore. Not because I can't afford the current price of new games. I certainly can. I just refuse to pay what people are trying to get for them anymore. And for the listeners that don't understand why, any of y'all that or have been followers of the Game Deflators slash Collectors Against Video Game Inflation page probably picked up on. I've been collecting for a long, long, long time. Like there's obviously the collectors that started back in the late 90s, early 2000s. I'm not quite one of those guys who are picking up things like a Panic Restaurant for $5 or buying it at clearance at KB Toys. But back when I started, it would be unusual to pay more than $5 for a cartridge. And all that has scaled some with time. There's just certain things I'm not going to do. Like I'm not going to hand over 20 or $25 for Super Mario Brothers 3. It's just there's no effing way, because it's extraordinarily common, and many of the games that people think are really rare aren't that. The only thing I've really seen that's come to mind on one of the Sega collector pages on Facebook there, I noticed a new collector popped up because you can kind of tell like one of the newbies comes along because they're all always asking just I wouldn't say dumb but more or less obtuse questions like, oh hey, should I buy this? And he wasn't really asking like so much, hey, is this a good deal, or how much should this go for? The typical annoying question was more asking things like, oh, I see this game is popular, should I buy it? And most of the answers were just a matter of, well, are you going to play it? Do you think you're actually going to enjoy it? Then yeah, buy it. There was one, I don't remember what it was. It was a Sega Master System game, was running about $70, and he was specifically asking about that. And someone gave him the asinine response that was essentially as like, well, if you think you'll enjoy it, it'll be worth $70. Yeah, it's like yes and no. I have real issues with that because that mentality is poisoning the well. Many people like the guy I'm referring to is come along and say, oh, this looks cool. I want to get into it, blah, blah. They'll get bored before long and they'll leave the hobby, but that they've done to the value or the cost of the games versus who want to conserve, or preserve rather, not conserve, preserve the games or even curate. Because at a certain point, when your collection gets large enough, you're really becoming a freaking curator rather than a collector. And things like that. You're just kind of ruining it for everyone else. Anyone out can go out and spend money. Anyone can go on eBay and buy a huge lot of games for below their whole paycheck or their saving or whatever, and feel that they're going to be temporarily happy or scratch that nostalgia itch. But I think it's a waste, and that's why I really don't look. But other than that one guy, nothing particular. I've seen more or less. I've seen a whole lot less pickup posts than like I saw one earlier today or last night where a guy was, happy that he found a 6-button controller for Genesis at Goodwill for $2, and I was happy for him too. I was like, "That's great. That's the way things used to be. That's the way it should be." It's not like these things are made of gold or, the resale value is becoming, more limited each day. If it's not a high end or just a highly popular game, even as some of the resale shops in my town are starting to learn, it's dwindling. People are losing interest. They price themselves out, and it was a fad, and it's still a fad.
Yeah, so one of the things I saw today actually was somebody posted a picture of an old Sega magazine, or some gaming magazine essentially, showcasing several titles that had scores, and one of them was a Kyo Flying Squadron, which, as everybody might know, is on Sega CD, side-scrolling shoot 'em up, and
Costs way too fucking much.
exactly, cost somewhere. I think it's 4 digits now. I
Yes.
think it's 1,000. Yeah, it's some stupid price. Well, the guy was talking about how it only received a 2-star review, and how I can't believe this magazine gave it a 2-star review. And then he mentioned some other game. I think it was like Thunder God or something on the Sega, and he was commenting on how that game had a poor review. It was 1 star, and he says, well, the actual like audio, like the music and everything was so good. I don't see why it didn't get 2 stars, at least for the music. And I just had to laugh. I was like, so what you're telling me is that you would be okay with a company putting out a crap game, but if the music is good, it deserves a higher rating. Let's disregard, bad controls and bad camera angles and bad gameplay. Oh, it has a great soundtrack, so we have to enjoy it like it for what it is. It's just, to me, that just doesn't make any sense. And Kyo's a good example. Kind of where I'm getting to with this is, if the game itself is fantastic, is it truly $1,000, whatever it may be that it costs? If the game is, if the game has great visuals, but the gameplay isn't that great, is it really, like, what's the point in that? Like, why would you put that money towards a title that's going to be in 4 digits, 750, whatever it may be? Why would you spend that type of money for a game? Is it just because the notoriety aspect to say I own it? Is it because everybody else thinks it's great? I mean, I just don't get the mentality behind that. And, I've time and time again have told you I would never pay more than, my limit on like an old game might be somewhere around $60-$70, but it would have to be a good deal. It's one of those where I will not pay more than about 30 to 40% of the value on a video game in the resale market. So, for example, a $200 game, I'm not going to pay more than $70 on a $200. And that's if I really wanted it. I mean, even now there's games on my shelf I look at that are $200 and $300. And, I've played a few of them and they're not worth $200 or $300. Are they rare? Sure, they're rare, but they're not worth $200 or $300.
That's another thing. Rarity is so subjective, but uh, shoot, I lost my train of thought because I had a comment about that. Oh, that's what it was. The thing is, and I've met and I've known other collectors that really have this mentality that like, well, the game is always going to be. It's like, yeah, and they'll bring up examples like that. It's like, and that is absolutely true. But this is the way I see it. It's like there will always be some form of demand. I mean, some people collect coins and stamps for Christ's sake. I used to collect baseball cards as a kid, and those are all just really boring things to collect for, in my opinion. Whatever. But here's the thing: as time goes on, every collecting hobby will reach its zenith. It'll reach its peak, and after that, people start dropping out. So yeah, there will all absolutely still be other collectors who have a demand for like a Persona on PlayStation 1 or a Panic Restaurant or oh, gotta say it, a little Samson on NES and things like that. But what's going to happen is those same people that have them for sale that won't come down on their price, like I demand $1,500 for this little Samson or whatever it is currently. Their people to sell to is going to shrink dramatically. And that happens. Let's say, for instance, let's say just ballparking, there's 100,000 retro game collectors, for NES in the world right now. And over the next few years, that total starts shrinking down. As it shrinks down, a lot of their games are going to go back into the market. Maybe they just stop collecting, period, and hang on to their stuff. Maybe it's put in storage, whatever. But as more of those games get released in the wild, and the games that still exist in the wild that hadn't been found for whatever reason or sitting in shops, the number of collectors dwindles. So those other collectors who didn't have that little Samson or whatever, they're going to get their hands on a copy. So eventually, when it goes from 100,000, 90,000 to 80,000 to 70,000 collectors and so on, we get down to say that theoretically last 10,000 collectors that go, oh, okay, well, 9,080 of us have our copy of Little Samson. 4,000 of us have it complete in the box, sealed, whatever. Who are you going to sell it to? Where does the value go from there? No one wants it anymore. The people that do want it probably already have it or know full well that they can just poke around and find it now because the demand is gone. And that's what a lot of people aren't thinking of. Everyone loves to throw around the title left and right. That's why I've really gotten to the habit of calling almost everything uncommon. Little Samson, despite how many people are going to rant and rave, is not a rare. It is very uncommon. I went to Retropalooza a few years ago, which is, I'd say, a fairly small retro convention. Was really just a big swap meet is what it was. It was just a couple of hundred tables, people selling, trading, whatnot. We counted no less than 5 copies of Little Samson right there in the convention. And that's not counting people like Pat, the NES Punk, and Norman, the game historian, who were guests there, who also own a copy of. So just off the top of my head, that is 7 right there. But there was 5 that I and my 2 friends visually confirmed were sitting right there at that one convention out of say 300 vendors tops. So things like that is just completely ridiculous. And yes, they all were priced at I think the cheapest one was like $1,100, and they went up from there. Sorry, rant off.
Yeah, and you're good. And your point on rare doesn't always mean value. I mean, I'm looking at Hoshigami Running Blue on PS1, game that when I was a kid, I used to get the official PlayStation magazine as a subscription, and it was a game that I saw reviews for, and it was at the time, very small reviews, not a whole lot of hype around this game. And I'm looking at, sales history. Now, I notice this isn't fully accurate, but, VG charts, occasionally I'll find some info as far as, the overall production of games and how many were sold. And in North America alone, this game sold under 30,000 copies. Pretty rare title if you think about it, from the fact that we're in a nation that's 330 million people or so. And 30,000 games were sold in the U.S. for that particular rare game, I would consider. Probably right under uncommon, but I would say it'd be considered rare. Not a very valuable game, probably $40. It's a lot higher than what it used to be. But, overall, I think a lot of it too is dependent on a lot of these other, podcasts and YouTubers that are hyping up what is essentially crap games. And I think you and I discussed it at one point to, if we ever had a podcast that had thousands of followers, to find a crap game, do a review, and stock up and see what happens. And I think there would be some truth to that. I think you would see a small spike in value as far as on the secondary market.
Oh, absolutely. I call it the YouTube because it happens constantly. I mean, still to this day, it started years ago and it still happens constantly. so and so popular YouTuber puts out a review of this game, that game's sales will just spike. Whether it's Hello Neighbor or Five Nights at Freddy's or um, I don't know. I don't watch all the YouTube channels I watch for retro games are pretty small channels, fairly obscure, like On the Stick, which does good old games, and Same Name Different Game is a series I like that he does where he compares them, like Ninja Gaiden on the NES versus Ninja Gaiden on the Sega Master System. Same name, different game, that kind of. So those guys usually don't have a dramatic effect, but other, as I like to call them, the ass clowns, the game chasers, who I haven't watched them in years, but I'm recently hearing that they've kind of done themselves out of a job, so to speak, because all the games are gone because they excited a hobby in people and a taste for nostalgia, and it came back and bit them, as I said it would years ago. I heard secondhand that they're having trouble because, frankly, the games just aren't out there anymore. And it's like, yeah, there's a limited quantity, and you get a frenzy of hundreds of thousands of people going after them.
It's interesting that you say that too, because I found myself recently, whenever picking up titles, I'm picking up, what are essentially common titles, or more uncommon, I guess you could say. But even some of these titles that had, 20, not 20, but somewhere around 100,000, 200,000 copies sold, pretty common titles, I guess, given what they are. And even some of those games are going up in a $10-15 range for some strange reason. I guess because people aren't finding rarer games, and they're picking up anything they can. It just looks obscure. So that's just what I've noticed. Well, we're getting to our closing point here for the podcast. So just to kind of
do you want to keep going?
Go on. No, we can end it. I mean,
okay,
we'll probably stay around the 45-minute round.
Yeah, let's end it at 45. And we can save some stuff for next week.
Yeah. So overall, just to kind of rehash, one of the things we're going to be doing is our crappy game challenge. So again, James has to play Technocop on the Genesis. I have to play Captain Skyhawk on the NES. To give a little background on it, we've got a minimum of 30 minutes that need to be played for the game. No 19 minutes this time. And we essentially have to stick with it. 30 minutes. If we're enjoying ourselves, like if I find myself enjoying Captain Skyhawk, I'll keep playing a little longer. Not to say I will. I highly doubt I would enjoy it, but we'll see. We'll see. James doubts it. After that, we'll write a quick review. Keep in mind that our review is very subjective on the 30 minutes. We're not aware that maybe 2 hours into the game, it gets better. We're going to do it based on our first impressions in those 30 minutes. And essentially, at least my thought process, I don't know about yours when picking a title, but I'm trying to find anything on James's shelf via his VG Collect page that looks like he just picked it up at a flea market for $1 because he could and threw it on his shelf. So that's kind of the route I'm going right now.
Funny enough, I have a weird habit that I can remember where almost every time where my retro games came from, like City Connection, for instance. I actually bought it from the gentleman that was working as my assistant at the flea market at the time. He had told me that he was an older fellow. He had told me when he lived in Japan, he used to buy Nintendo games all the time, and that he still had them. And I was just like, yeah, whatever, you BSing me. And then one day he showed up to help me work at the flea market, and he literally just like he said, I had to grab these quick, so I just throw them in a bag. And I was like, what? And he opened up this garbage bag that was just full of NES games with their loose boxes and their manuals and things like that. So I remember buying almost all of them from him, but I didn't buy the box. I turned around and helped him sell those. But I got City Connection from him, and I actually remember getting Technocop. I'm pretty sure I bought it from the retro game store, well, the game/DVD store that you used to work at. So I'm fairly certain that's where it came from, funny enough.
Yeah, I know Castlevania. I picked that up at a flea market, as a matter of fact. I want to say it was like $5. Picked it up with a few other titles. Honestly, I can't remember offhand. If I saw the titles, I would know what came, where it came from. And Captain Skyhawk, God, I pick up so many lots every now and then. Of NES lots and Super Nintendo lots. I would figure this one came out of a lot because there's no way in hell I would have paid $5 for this. It's just one of those games that happened to not have it and threw it on the shelf. So we'll see how this goes.
Yeah, that's certainly something else for anyone listening that wants to give a suggestion. John is primarily focusing on, do I already own the game, to try to force me to play it. Whereas I'm not afraid to be like, oh, you should play this. Well, I don't have it. Just like Captain Skyhawk, he actually thought he didn't have it. I was about to buy him and send him a copy. They're like, oh, you do now. Because honestly, it's a $2 or $3 or $4 game. It's not, not a big deal. Plus shipping like less than $10 to inflict that kind of torment on a good friend. So
yeah, and we'll likely, as we continue to podcast and the Crappy Game Challenge, we'll likely, place our VG Collect links on our Facebook page, Game Deflators, and any suggestions that come through, feel free to pop up a game that you'd like to see us suffer over.
And we definitely want to hear your comments. Bear with us. This is our second run, so we're around the formatting and the quality, get ourselves a little more organized. But any decent suggestions or feedback, we'd like to hear it, such as letting us know if we're not speaking clearly, any of the basic stuff, and we'll work on that. So we got 50 seconds left. Any last thoughts?
Nope. I think we covered a good bit. We'll obviously have some more to talk about next week. I think we'll probably look at doing some, we'll probably stick to a similar format, current games that we're looking to play, or current games we're playing, upcoming games, some of the stupid stuff we're seeing online, even, local things that we find. And then we'll talk about our Crappy Game Challenge. I mean, we'll likely have some different topics that come up, and, we'll see how it goes.
All right, then. Well, this has been James.
And John.
And this has been the Game Deflators Podcast. Talk to you guys later.